Hey, Rogue Valley Christian Church, it's Pastor Josh here, and we are in the 10th study of the book of Job. If you want a summary of where we are at, I'd encourage you to go back to study number 9 and listen to about the first 5 minutes of Pastor Darren's talk just to get refreshed on where we are at in the book of Job and how we've gotten here. Because last week, we looked at the second round of dialogue, of conversations between Job and what become called his miserable comforters. These people proclaim to be his friends, end up becoming more of an antithesis to Job than help. And so here we are now in the 10th study, and we're looking at the third round of conversation or dialogue. And I wouldn't even call it dialogue at this point because it's just flat out arguing. It gets mean, it gets nasty in this third round of talking. And you kind of can't imagine this without imagining some yelling and some passion and some intensity. And you got to remember, Job is in this suffering state. He's frustrated. He's lost everything he held dear. And he's in torment, even in his soul, even in the midst of holding out for integrity before God, and that he will not curse God. And so we open this round of dialogue with a word from Eliphaz. So Eliphaz, he's just going to open up in chapter 22 with some more accusations and some suggestions of how Job may have sinned and what he should do about it. So we're going to be looking at chapters 22 through 28. So turn with me in your Bibles, Job chapter 22, and the first thing we're going to hear is from Eliphaz. And he says in verse 5, "Is not your evil abundant? There is no end to your iniquities." I mean, that's a big statement. You're evil. You haven't just sinned a little bit. You've sinned a lot. You don't just got a few problems. Your whole life is a problem, Job. And he says there's no end to your iniquities. I can't even make a list, but for the sake of making a list, I made a list for you in verses 6 through 9. And if you read that, you'll see a list of what Eliphaz suggests Job has done wrong. And we don't know if he just kind of made these up because these are generic sins that people might have struggled with. But basically, it's these sins of saying, you have not been just to your community. You have been unjust in failing to take care of the poor and even taking from the poor the little bit that they had. And so he says, you have not been just, and your evil is abundant. And this is why you're experiencing suffering in your life. So it's kind of the same thing over and over again. Eliphaz, he said the argument hasn't really changed. He's just doubling down on it and laying a hold of it. But then he says in verse 21, after listing out that Job is surely a wicked man, verse 20 says, but agree with God. Agree with God and be at peace. He goes on, he says, if you return to the Almighty, verse 23, if you return to the Almighty, you will be built up. If you remove injustice far from your tents, if you lay gold in the dust and gold of Ophir among the stones of the torrent bed, then the Almighty will be your gold and your precious silver. For then you will delight yourself in the Almighty, and he will lift your face up. Verse 29, for when they are humbled, you say, it is because of pride. But he saves the lowly. God saves the lowly. He delivers even the one who is not innocent. Who will be delivered through the cleanness of your hands? So it's actually some really good theology here. It's actually, Eliphaz ends up getting to the gospel. And he says, you know what? Even those that have wickedness in their life, if they'll just repent and humble themselves before God, God will restore them. God will build them up. God will bring flourishing and goodness to their lives. So it's actually, you're reading the gospel all of a sudden from Eliphaz's lips. But the problem is, he's got the wrong audience. Because we know from God's perspective, God has said, no, Job is righteous. And that's why I'm allowing him to be tested. He says, Job is righteous. So we're not actually doubting Job's claim to integrity and righteousness here. But so as Eliphaz is sharing this, you're like, man, that is great advice, but you're giving it to the wrong person. It's actually solid theology, but it's the wrong time to share it. And so that is what Eliphaz says. And Job utters his reply in chapter 23. Let me grab this. My notes here. So Job utters a reply, and he says, you know what the problem is? He said, God is not available. If God would just show up, then I would be vindicated. You would see that I am actually righteous, and I deserve to be rewarded, not to be punished. But the problem is, God hasn't been available. Chapter 23, verse 2. Today also my complaint is bitter. My hand is heavy on account of my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know what I know what he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in the greatness of his power? No. He would pay attention to me. There, an upright man could argue with him, and I would be acquitted forever with my judge. So he's confident that, no, I've been righteous. And if I could just find God, if I could just get him to show up, if I could just walk into his courtroom, then you would see that this would be settled once and for all. You would see that I have followed the laws and the paths and the ways of God. I am the righteous one, and I know what should come to me. And so Job, he's really what he's struggling with is God's silence. Chapter 24, he kind of says the same thing. He says, verse 1, why are not times of judgment kept by the Almighty? Why are not times of judgment kept by the Almighty? It's like God has no office hours. You know that company you're always trying to get a hold of, but they always seem to be closed or on hold? And you're like, when are they ever going to pick up? I'm just going to have to drive down there and knock on the door because I call and I call, but it's never answered. That's how Job feels right now. God is not accessible. God is not hearing me. If God would just show up and listen, everyone would see. You would know I've done righteous and things would be made right. He has this confidence in God and this confidence in that, but he's just wondering, where is he? And in chapter 24, he starts to say, you know what though, Eliphaz? Look around with me. Is it the wicked who are always punished? Because I'm starting to look around and kind of see that it seems like people who do what they want whenever they want get away with it. And they actually start to flourish. I mean, look at this. He says, verse 2, some move landmarks. They seize flocks and pasture them. They drive away donkeys from the fatherless, and they take the widow's ox for a pledge. So they're taking advantage from other people. They're stealing. They're not playing by God's rules. And it says, continuing verse 12, it says, from out of the city the dying are groaning, and the soul of the wounded cries for help. Yet God charges no one with wrong. God's not showing up for me in my righteousness, but he's not even showing up to do anything about the wickedness of these people. There's people crying in the cities that are being taken advantage of. The widow's ox has been stolen. And yet, have you seen God showing up for that? He says, verse 21, they wrong the barren, childless woman, and do no good to the widow. Yet, God prolongs the life of the mighty by his power. It says, they keep on living. They haven't been zapped by lightning yet. And they're just taking advantage of people. They haven't even been trying to pretend to play by God's rules. So he says in verse 25, if it is not so, who will prove me a liar and show that there is nothing to what I say? He says, you can't disagree with me. I can come up with more examples of wicked people that are prospering, and you're not going to have any argument that can counteract my data. No one can draw argument to that. So he's saying, where's God? God hasn't shown up to judge. These rules of righteousness and wickedness that you talk about, and that my suffering is because of the wrong I've done, it doesn't hold up to what we're seeing around us. It doesn't hold up, does it, Eliphaz? But then Bildad jumps in. And you kind of imagine Bildad being furious because he just gives this intense 5-verse speech. It's just 5 verses. He says, dominion and fear are with God. This is chapter 25, Bildad. Dominion and fear are with God. He makes peace in his high heaven. Is there any number to his armies? Upon whom does his light not arise? How then can man be in the right before God? God has the biggest armies in the world. God created and owns this whole planet. He doesn't owe anybody anything. So how then can man be in the right before God? How can he who is born of women be pure? Verse 5, behold, even the moon is not bright, and the stars are not pure in his eyes. How much less man who is a maggot, and the Son of Man who is a worm. So you compare to God, we people, we're just like worms. Do you pay any account when you walk past a worm? Do you pay any special favor to a maggot? No. At best you walk by, at worst you squish it, right? He's saying that's humanity's relationship with God. And so what Bildad's really saying is, who do you think you are, Job? You can't talk about the God of the universe like this. Who do you think you are? You're just a maggot before the Almighty. You better watch yourself, Job. Not even the stars would dare to talk like you do in your boldness. And so he's coming at Job and saying, you don't have a right to talk like this. You don't get to be this bold before the Almighty. You need some more fear and trembling in your life. You need to be on your knees with your face in the dirt. So this is Bildad's short speech. And you'll notice that Zophar doesn't even show up in this dialogue. I guess he doesn't have anything new to add. It's just pounding down on the same old points. But Job replies in chapter 26, saying, I know that God is mighty, and I know that he is mysterious, and I know that he is bigger than me and that he holds the universe in his hands. Don't try to lecture me, Bildad. I know these things to be true. And he goes through this whole list after offering the sarcasm. This is actually kind of funny, so we should take a moment to look at it. So if you look at chapter 26, look at verse 2. This is actually Job's first words in replying to Bildad. And this shows you that low ball arguments in debate have always been around, to just take a shot at somebody through sarcasm. Apparently is not a modern phenomenon. Verse 2, how you have helped him who has no power, Bildad. How you have saved the arm that has no strength. How have you counseled him who has no wisdom, and plentifully declared sound knowledge. So he's saying, wow, Bildad, now everything makes sense to me, right? He's just making these purely sarcastic comments, saying, okay, thanks, Bildad. I'm glad you think you have it all figured out. But actually, guess what? I know a couple of things too. And he says this whole incredible list about Sheol and God binding up the clouds, and that he was the one who calmed the chaos at creation, and that the world is astounded at God's rebuke. He just makes these huge statements about who God is and his power, and that he's so uncontainable. We cannot contain God, let alone comprehend him. And then verse 14 of chapter 26, just kind of a good summary, statement for us. He says, behold, these things I just listed above, these are but the outskirts of his ways. And how small a whisper do we hear of him? But the thunder of his power, who can understand? Job is saying, Bildad, I'm not claiming to understand everything about God. I know he's so much bigger than man. So don't lecture me on this. But I will maintain my integrity. And this is chapter 27. Job says, I'm not giving up what I know to be true. Me, I would have given in to peer pressure by this point. I would have been like, all right, I didn't start agreeing with you, but you've just nailed it through my head long enough. And I want you guys to like me. So you know what? I'm just going to make up some sins. I'm going to repent of them. And I'm going to hope that you're right. And all my suffering is just instantly going to go away. But Job, no, he has a backbone. He says, I know what I know to be true. And I have not sinned before God. And this is chapter 27. He says, verse 5, far be it from me to say that you are right. These are fighting words. Job is full on arguing. Far be it from me to say that you are right. I am not going to give up an inch. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. He's just doubling down too in saying, I have not sinned and I'm not going to change my answer because I know what is right and that is the path I have walked. And then he goes into this interesting little section in verse 13 on the wicked. And he's saying, I know that I haven't sinned and I know how the universe works. I know the moral fabric of the universe. And it's that the righteous will be rewarded and the wicked will be punished. And the last chapter in 25, or 24, I guess it was, he was saying, I don't know where God is. God isn't showing up to judge. But he's saying, but I still understand how this world works. I understand what's right and wrong and what that means. And so verse 13, he says, this is the portion of a wicked man before God, and the heritage that oppressors receive from the Almighty. If the wicked's children are multiplied, it is for the sword. So if they're being blessed and having lots of children, it's going to be for death. And if his descendants will have not enough bread. And those who survive him, the pestilence will bury. And the widows do not weep. Though he heap up silver like dust, he has so many riches, he's just sweeping them up off the floor. And he piles up clothing like clay. He just has walk-in closets full of fancy clothes. And he piles them up as if they're as common as clay. And he may pile it up, but the righteous will wear it. And the innocent will divide the silver. So Job is saying, I still know what will come to the wicked. And I will still walk in the path of righteousness. I'm not giving that up. And this leads us up to chapter 28, where Job goes into a poem about the value of wisdom. Listen to this. Chapter 28, verse 1. Surely there is a mine for silver, and a place for gold that they refine. Iron is taken out of the earth, and copper is smelted for more. So he's saying these precious metal, these treasures, these things that people seek. I mean, even think of Oregon, where people came out here because they were coming for gold. They were going to come make it rich. They were willing to change their whole life that their fortunes might turn if they made it out west, right? He's saying, surely there's a place you can mine for gold and you can find silver, and iron can be taken up out of the earth, and copper can be smelted and made into helpful objects that are worth a fortune. But then verse 12, but where shall wisdom be found? These things that you think are rare and hard to find, those can be found. It takes hard work. It takes a lot of looking. You can find gold. You can find silver. But where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its worth, and it is not found in the land of the living. The deep says, it is not in me. And the sea says, it is not with me. It cannot be bought for gold, and silver cannot be weighed as its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, in precious onyx or sapphire. Gold and glass cannot equal it, nor can it be exchanged for jewels of fine gold. Isn't this beautiful language here? No mention shall be made of coral or of crystal. Why even mention those? Because even those have no worth compared to wisdom. The price of wisdom is above pearls. But from where then does wisdom come? Verse 20. Where does it come? Well, we know where it comes from, and it's from God. And that's what Job says here in verse 23. God understands the way to it, and he knows its place. For he looks to the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he gave to the wind its weight and apportioned the waters by measure, when he made a decree for the rain and a way for the lightning of the thunder, then he saw it and declared it. He established it and searched it out. God not only knows where wisdom is to be found, but he is the author of what is wise and good. And he said to man, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn away from evil is understanding. So not only is God the one who knows where wisdom is to be found and is the author of wisdom, he has also told humanity, revealed to humanity what is wise or what is wisdom. And wisdom is the fear of the Lord and to turn away from evil. The fear of the Lord and to turn away from evil. And I think it's good to realize this, that biblical wisdom, it's not just knowing what's best, right? We say like, oh, you made a wise decision. You made the best decision, right? You made the wise decision. You researched well, made a wise decision. Well, that means you made the best decision, and it's good, and it's part of wisdom. It's part of it. But in the Bible, it's also wisdom is to worship God and to walk in his ways. In the Bible, wisdom is to worship God and to walk in his ways. We can say one is wise when we go, wow, she really worships God, reveres God, and she really walks in God's ways. She is wise, right? That is biblical wisdom. And that is what Job is saying is precious. You could pile up all the treasure in the world. You could have all the money in the world. You could have a mansion full of it, and yet you'd have nothing if you didn't have wisdom. And as Job tells us, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn away from evil is understanding. So to worship God and revere him and to walk in his ways, that is true wisdom. And I think that's important for us. And what I see in Job here is that he doesn't understand everything. He doesn't understand where God is. Why isn't God showing up? Why do I feel so unheard by the Lord? And we feel like that a lot of times when we're walking through bad times. We go, where's God? Isn't he going to show up? Because it seems like when life's going well, it seems like we're hearing from God all the time. Man, God really spoke to me today. Man, I was reading my Bible. Man, I was at church. I just had this thought. I was praying and the sun came through the window. When life's going good, it's easy to feel like we're hearing from God all the time, like he's so close. But when life's not going so good, sometimes our connection with him gets tough. Sometimes we start to wonder. Sometimes those doubts start creeping in. And Job's just been saying everything he doesn't understand, how mysterious God is, that it doesn't seem like God's anywhere near. But he ends this chapter 28 sticking with what he does know. He knows that God is the source of wisdom. And Job desires wisdom. He wants to be wise. And he says, I don't have everything figured out, but I know God is the source of wisdom. And so there's a lot I don't know, but I'm going to stick with what I do know. Not too long ago, I was having a pretty bad week. And just kind of feeling flustered and frustrated. And I was physically tired, and I was feeling spiritually tired. And I just got to the end of a day. I had been having some struggles with my kids. And I just thought, I don't know if I can take another day of this. And I want to be walking in peace in my heart. And I want to feel at rest in God, but I don't. And I was just kind of sitting there at the end of this day, just feeling flustered and frustrated and exhausted. And I didn't feel centered in the Lord. And I kind of had this moment of just sitting there, and I was like, okay, there's not just a fix it. I can't just snap out of it. I can't just pray this perfect prayer and expect instant peace to just overwhelm every sector of my being. But I can go back to the basics. And I was just thinking about some of those times in my life when my faith has been so simple and so sweet. And in some of those times, I just did some spontaneous Bible reading. I would just open and run to the Psalms and just kind of enjoy reading a psalm. And in some of those times when my faith has been sweet and simple, I just love just kind of sitting outside in the backyard for 20 minutes and just kind of being out there and praying and having my Bible. Just these carving these little moments. And I'm a routine person. I like doing my everyday Bible reading plan. I have it tucked in my Bible, what I'm supposed to be reading each day, and I like doing that, those Bible reading plans. But I kind of realized, I just need to get back to some just kind of honest moments of pause and prayer and get back to God. And it wasn't an instant fix. It didn't provide all the answers, but it was recentering for me to just sit in that stillness with God and just to kind of go back to the basics. That's all I'm trying to say here. Just stick with what you do know. Just go back to those times when your faith was young and free, And it's not bad to just go back to the basics sometimes. And that's what I see Job doing here. He's saying, yeah, I don't know everything. Yes, God is mysterious. No, I don't know where God is. But I do know this. Chapter 28, verse 23. God understands the way to wisdom. And then verse 28. And behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to turn away from evil is understanding. So Job knows what he's going to keep on doing. He's going to keep on worshiping God, and he's going to keep walking in his ways. And I think that's good advice for us, not to overcomplicate it, but to keep worshiping God and keep walking in his ways. And sometimes that's what it looks like to trust God amid tragedy. Not to have the answers, not to be able to fix it, not to be able to understand everything, but to be able to trust God amidst tragedy by continuing in the way of wisdom, worshiping God and walking in his ways. So just go back to the basics. If you're in a place where you're hurting, don't overcomplicate it. Go back to simplicity in prayer, maybe run to the Psalms. I don't know what it looks like for you exactly. That's kind of what it looks like for me. But these are good words and good advice from the book of Job.